dementia. We want their first person perspective to gain insight from their experiences. So today I'm really pleased to have joining with us Jim Butler. Jim is in his early 70s. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, I believe just 4 years ago. Jim, welcome.
Well, I'm glad to be here with you.
So I love how we are calling, like when we talked to you, you talked about disarming an Alzheimer's diagnosis. And I love that phrase, but tell us what you mean by that.
Well, I think what I mean by that, I have cognitive issues, and it has to do with memory and confusion and stuff that I was able to do routinely for my whole life. And now I have to search for it when I'm looking to pull that up from my brain. And so when I got my diagnosis, I had the good fortune to be surrounded, or to be in groups with a lot of people that had been covering the same ground as I was now covering. I was then covering for a year or so in front and before me, and I learned a lot for them. And one of the things I learned is to, I was so worried after I got my diagnosis. I was frightened and unsure of myself, and every time I had a cognitive hiccup, and I get them a couple of dozen times a day, I think I'm getting worse, and I'd worry about it, or I'd get frustrated or angry about it. And after a while, I learned from being around with these folks that had covered that ground before me. I learned that, be gentle with yourself, and don't get impatient, and don't get angry and frustrated. Try and what I call that is try and smile at it. When I have a hiccup, when I have something I can't remember, I smile and I say, just relax, Jim, and it'll come back, and it usually does. And if I'm at a store or I'm interacting with someone that I'm not familiar with, they're giving me a bunch of instructions or a bunch of messages, I can't absorb it quite that fast, and I'll ask them. I'll say, slow down, I've got some cognitive issues, or I have Alzheimer's, or whatever it might be, but I'll please run it by me again, or whatever the case might be. And I've had, and that's my way of being gentle with myself. And I'm moving the wrong way here. That's my way of being gentle with myself. And if I'm gentle with myself, I'm gentle with most every other thing in my life. Probably more so than before I got this diagnosis. And so that's an upside to this condition.
Absolutely. Tell me, when did you first note that maybe something might be wrong, or something was a bit off? How did it first manifest? Were you working in a job? What were your circumstances?
Well, I was in the healthcare space, the addiction treatment business, for a lot of years, but I had retired a few years before I had any cognitive issues. But I guess, there was one incident, but I had been noticing, as my father would say, my clutch was slipping in an old stick shift car. I would be forgetful things, or I'd be having trouble doing something with that I was trying to accomplish that I had done lots of times before, and it'd be, but I'm a guy, so I think about that and I just get angry and blow it off, and I had an issue at the Apple store in Chicago. My phone conked out, and I went in there, and I've never been Mr. high technology, but they gave me a new phone, and they were trying to download it, and they were telling me stuff to do. I couldn't do it, and I couldn't follow them. I just couldn't get in sync with it. And
so it was more like a processing thing. It was.
That was the thing that resonated with me strong enough. I was leaving the Apple store, and I was going to our second home in Michigan, and I was thinking to myself, there's something going on, and you've been thinking about this for a year, and you need to look at it. You need to address it. And I did. When I got to the house, my wife was there, and some friends of ours that lifelong friends, and I told them over dinner. I said, "There's something going on with me," and that drive up there. It was the 4th of July weekend. I had no driver apps or anything like that. It was just really frustrating and scary. It really rattled me, and I shared that with them. And then when the holiday was over, I reached out to my internal medicine guy, and my internal medicine doctor in Chicago, and he hooked me up with with the folks, the cognitive neurology and Alzheimer's unit.
At that point, Jim, you were noticing something was wrong. Were other people, do you think, were people, maybe your wife or people you're close to, were they beginning to pick up signs, or did you really disguise it well?
Not really. I mean, I didn't pick that up from anybody that they were, that they were noticing my forgetfulness, and I certainly wasn't sharing it with anybody. I just kept it quiet to myself. And when I was doing that, I'd always think my dad had Alzheimer's, and so that was kind of in the background of me for that year or year and a half before I reached out and engaged with it, that I was thinking, am I going where my dad went, and yeah. So in answer to your question, that's it.
Do you, were you ever genetically tested? Do you know if you have a genetic predisposition to Alzheimer's?
I don't know. I mean, like going on one of the, I got lots of testing at Northwestern in the course of getting my diagnosis, but, I assumed that, I didn't, I don't know if science knows right now if it is necessarily passed down generationally from father to son or daughter or that kind of thing. I still don't know that today. I've never really researched it, but it was clearly on my mind. Not having any insight into it, I thought maybe it's contagious. Maybe it's, yeah. I had curly hair when I was a little, and my mother did, and I figured I got that from my mom, and maybe I got Alzheimer's from my dad. Was the kind of stuff that was going through my mind.
Well, how old was your dad when he was diagnosed?
He was probably 74 or 75.
Okay, so not too far from where you are, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's and I watched it progress. I mean, when my mom passed away and my dad was living in Florida, and he would come back to Chicago frequently, and he'd often stay with my wife and I, and we noticed my dad's term, his clutches slipping a little bit, and I would notice that in my dad. And he remarried down in Florida, and to a very good woman. And but he as it evolved, he ended up in a care center, a real good care center. We would go down and visit with him often.
I mean, I can imagine that's really it must be hard for you today because you've watched your dad go through Alzheimer's, and then you receive a diagnosis yourself. I can imagine that would be doubly as difficult.
Yeah, it was difficult. I'm a pluralistic person, and when I think back on that now, I think, oh well, your thinking was, I still don't know to this day if it's genetic or hereditary. I don't know. My dad had it. I have it. And that's just that's the way it is,
Jim, what was it like getting diagnosed for you? Was it a lengthy process, or by the time you went in, was it very clear that you were diagnosed with cognitive issues?
It was probably a 3-month process till we got the diagnosis. You start off with the cognitive testing. Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago is they're kind of the big players in the Midwest here, and so they have a lot of resources. But when I talk about it, I say you get to flunk your way into the next test, and it started out with cognitive testing and memory testing and that kind of stuff, and I ended up then getting an MRI and eventually a lumbar tap.
And did they find plaques and tangles?
They show the tau and the amyloids that are present in Alzheimer's, or markers of Alzheimer's kind of thing.
So it's actually 3 months is a pretty quick diagnosis. I mean, we talk to people all the time, and sometimes it takes years before they know conclusively. How were you able to get the lumbar puncture? Is that something you opted in, or was it through a trial?
Well, it's what they wanted to do. At the center there, the doctor's name was Dr. Benoctapur and Dr. Ian Grant. I can't remember a lot of stuff, but I remember their names. And it's kind of, one test leads to another. I mean, if you do a certain way, perhaps on that cognitive testing or the memory testing, that qualifies you to go to the next thing. And I suppose that's part of the system at Northwestern. That's the way they do it. I've talked to any number of people who have gone to their doctors and in other facilities, and they didn't. They were sent away with a diagnosis without any of the kind of testing that I received, and I don't, that to me doesn't seem ideal, certainly. And I was fortunate to have this relationship with Northwestern where they've got all these resources. I don't think that's the case for everybody. I see a lot of folks in MCI support groups that, and I got a call recently from a relative that his wife, the doctor told his wife she probably has Alzheimer's, and I tried to talk about the testing, and he said, well, there really hasn't been, other than a little paper and pen testing, there hasn't been any testing. I said, well, I don't know, I don't know what to say to him.
Yeah, it is very inconsistent indeed. Jim, I'm curious, and I ask this question to many people because before my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I didn't know anything either about, what Alzheimer's was like. And one of the things that surprised me was this kind of up and down pattern that we've seen throughout, right? And I always thought, Alzheimer's was a disease where you kind of fade and it gets worse and it's a slippery slope. But there are these periods of lucidity that appear, at least, we see it very clearly with my mom, where some days we're like, wow, she's doing really well. Like she remembers a lot. And then other days, it appears that she's slipping down that slope. So from your perspective, would you describe it that way? Would you describe some days that you feel like, hey, I don't have anything wrong with me, and then other days where you really feel it?
I can answer it this way. I don't ever have the thought that, hey, I don't feel like I have it. But I have, some days are easier and more fluid and they work better than other days. Some days, I'm just sailing through a lot of stuff. I don't mean to say that I don't have forgetfulness. I do. My forgetfulness is dozens of times a day, but it's not the kind of thing you really trip over. You just close your eyes and think about it for a moment, and it'll come back to you. Try and relax, and it will come back to you. But some days there are difficult days. It seems like every darn thing I try to accomplish is so frustrating, so complicated and frustrating that it's like, oh, the hell with it all. And you just I'll write it down and do it tomorrow. And yeah. Certainly have those days. I don't have any. I mean, I enjoy every day. I try and make it my business to enjoy every day. I certainly have frustrations, and I don't mean to sit here and talk on this program and say I don't get frustrated and pissed off and and I'm really sad, heartbroken, because I do get that way frequently. But it's real important for me to kind of pull myself out of that. And I've got a great marriage and a lot of wonderful people in my life, and we're financially secure and that kind of stuff. And I don't want to waste any of this time. I don't know how much time I'm going to have going forward, and I don't want to waste a darn bit of it by being resentful or I'm blessed with a lot of good people in my life, and I want to live up to that.
Often there's so much, and in fact, it's been scientifically proven that if you have support and love around you, it actually makes you healthier, in so many ways. I mean, there's so many complications with Alzheimer's, with depression and anxiety and things like that. And the love and support of a stable relationship in a family is really helpful, I believe, to overcoming some of those. What about mood changes? Have you found that you are maybe uncharacteristically get upset about things or angry or anything like that that's present in your personality?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the way I felt about general stuff of life 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I still feel the same. I evolve like anyone, and my politics might change or my this or that, but no, I don't. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty I don't find myself, I forget the question. What was it?
No, sometimes people describe symptoms of Alzheimer's as like acting uncharacteristically, like, all of a sudden the most even-tempered people will all of a sudden have outbursts or things like that. I was just wondering if you've experienced any mood changes through the course of what you've experienced.
I suppose sometimes I get overly frustrated, and if my wife were here, she'd probably say, yeah, Jim, then you turn into a pain in the neck,
Right.
But I don't, I try and, I'm more gentle with myself now than I was for the previous 5 years, any time prior to the last 5 years, so, I think I roll with stuff a lot more fluidly.
Do you feel like you're relatively stable over the last 4 or 5 years since you were diagnosed, or do you feel like there are days where you feel like you're actually declining?
Well, I kind of monitor myself every day in a casual way, but I still drive. I drive. I have no difficulty driving a car. I have at our place in Michigan, there's a pump that a fella came over that's going to be doing some work for us. And I won't go into the story, but we have a pump to drain the swimming pool, and Lisa said, "Get the pump." I said, "Do we have a pump to drain the swimming pool?" I couldn't remember. Yeah, certainly we do. We take the water off of it when it's, and I couldn't remember that. Kind of that was an episode yesterday. So I had that kind of stuff, but that's the kind of stuff when it dawned on me. I said, "Where, Lisa? Where?" I said, "Not in the garage." She said, "Why don't you look on the pool shed?" Oh, duh. And that's where it was. So, that was a hiccup yesterday. I have those all the time.
Yeah. What are some of your coping strategies? Like, enlighten us. We have a lot of people watching who are either caring for someone or have a dementia diagnosis. Is there anything in particular you found that really helps you to cope?
Sure, being gentle with yourself. When you have those, instead of getting frustrated and feeling terrible about, instead of try smiling at yourself. If you've got cognitive issues, you're going to be dealing with them most every day, and be gentle with yourself. Be gentle with yourself. If you can possibly find a way of doing that, that'd be my advice to do that. Try and disarm it. Try and walk away from it. Be gentle with yourself. Give it another shot later. Ask someone for some help, whatever you need to do. But
have you noted any patterns, maybe triggers, or things that help you to really cope or compensate for these times, like these episodes that you've shared with us?
Well, sometimes if we're having dinner with friends, and another couple is fine. When you get 3 couples and there's 4 or 5 conversations going on with those 3 couples, to me they're all speaking a different language. I can't engage with any of them.
Too much going on at one time.
Too much going on at one time. Yeah, I just can't. I'll kind of get quiet there, and when I can jump in with something, I'll jump in with it. And that's my way of coping with those kinds of situations. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, it's interesting because when you talked about the Apple Store and something that, that first went on when you went into the Apple Store and you got frustrated because you couldn't follow what they were telling you. And then, when you talk about dinner conversations, that to me it's like processing. It's the speed of processing that seems to be impacted, in the manifestation of cognitive impairment in your case. Would you describe it that way?
I suppose, I met a friend of mine, and we both have dogs, and we took them over to the lakefront here in Chicago for a beautiful, it was 55 degrees in Chicago. And that's at this time of the year in Chicago, that's a gift. And everybody's social distancing, of course, but the lakefront was full of people and the dogs were running around. And And when we were driving back, Bob and I were talking, and I was telling him, I said, these last couple of days, maybe I've got too many moving parts going on, but I feel like I'm getting worse. Is what I shared with Bob. I didn't share that with my wife. I was thinking about it yesterday when I was with her, or maybe I was thinking about it when I was driving back from Michigan, but I did share that with Bob today. I said, I sometimes I think the cognitive issues are getting a little worse, I think. And Bob said, geez, I didn't know that's a thing, Jim. And I thank him for that. And it just could be me being critical of myself today. I don't know, but it was what I was thinking when I was with a guy who's, a good friend of mine that I can talk to. And that's again, that's kind of, the stuff that's knocking around in my head that I'm tripping over and having a hard time with and not wanting to talk about are the things that I need to talk about to someone, not always my wife, maybe someone else. Maybe tonight we're sitting here with, I don't know how many people we're talking to, probably a whole bunch, but those are all coping mechanisms for me and my way of getting through, my way of dealing with this.
Is remarkable. I mean, I think a lot of people, tend to hide, and I could see why maybe talking about it would make it a little bit less scary because you have reassurances of friends and and whatnot. How are you dealing with COVID? I mean, it's on everyone's mind. It's the only thing anyone's talking about today is this coronavirus. Has this time been difficult for you?
Well, I'm pretty realistic about it, and I watch a good bit of TV in the right spaces, and so I'm adapting to it pretty well, I think, and so is my wife. My wife works for CVS Health, and they're right in the epicenter of with the entities between insurance and CVS, the drugstores, and all that kind of stuff. She's really been busy, but. I forget the question. What was it?
No worries. No, I was just asking you how you're coping with COVID. If you're finding this.
Oh, yeah, but I think fine. I mean, I'm proud of what I see around Chicago and in the stores in Michigan or Chicago, wherever I'm at. I was when I was on the walk with Bob this afternoon on the lakefront. Everybody was even in. There's acres and acres of land, and if people were 5 feet away from you, they would move over 10 or 15 feet when you passed and smile at each other. It was kind of fun, and it was the spirit of where we're all pulling on this thing. So it was great fun to be there. And no, I mean, it was a terrific thing to do today.
Great. And Jim, give us a piece of advice for those people who are experiencing cognitive difficulties and perhaps just got a diagnosis of a dementia, whether it be Alzheimer's or another dementia. What's your sage advice to them?
My sage advice would be to reach out to the Alzheimer's Association. There's a lot of resources out there. We might be talking to people all over the world. I don't know with this audience, but there's a chapter of the National Office of the Alzheimer's Association in every state that there is. They can put people onto they can engage people in groups and in support groups and in a lot of different things that they find. For me, being with my peers, learning from people who have covering this ground before I did and can share stuff with me is enormously important. Staying home, worrying, feeling bad, hiding, to me that is the antithesis of if you can possibly engage with other people that can help you on this front. Your hospitals, perhaps your churches, a lot of entities around, I think, have support for folks with the diagnosis, and I would strongly encourage them to engage.
Do you how carefully do you practice like lifestyle, exercise? Would you watch your diet? Did you have any other related diseases like diabetes or anything that you're managing?
No, I don't. I've been pretty healthy. I had some back surgery about 6 or 8 months ago, but no, Yeah, I know. I'm pretty healthy.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jim, and we're so appreciative for to you for sharing your story with us. I know it's enormously helpful to many people out there, no matter which side of the fence you're sitting on, looking after someone with dementia or someone diagnosed. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
You're more than welcome. Thank you for taking the time.
So as always, with all of these interviews, we upload them to our website, beingpatient.com. If you haven't already done so, please sign up for our newsletters. We will let you know about other interviews with people with dementia. We also interview a lot of experts who are at the forefront of research. So if you want to keep up to date with those interviews, please sign up for our newsletter. Thanks very much for watching.